What's going on, friends? And thanks again for joining us here on Expanded Perspectives with me, Cam Hale, and I'll be steering this ship not alone today. Today I have frozen Kyle Filson from the baseball fields.
Yes, sir.
It got a little cold, and the great beast himself almost had his flames extinguished.
Yeah. Oh, man. We had a baseball scrimmage set up.
Whoa. Wasn't it 29 degrees when y'all was the first pitch?
Yeah, but the ironic thing was the day before, I think it was like 67. So,
Yep.
we put this together weeks ahead of time, of course. So the day before, I'm like, it's going to be great. I'm looking forward to this weekend.
Almost 70-degree weather.
And I'm like, well, the weatherman comes on and says, well, it's going to get a little colder tomorrow. I'm like, sure it is. Yeah, sure it is. He wasn't lying. I got up. I was like 19. I was like, what happened? So it was miserable. We went out there. We watched the kids. The kids didn't want to be out there. They had frozen snot on their face. People were just throwing, and they were just trying to get out. You know what I mean? They're just like, I don't even care if I strike out. I just want to get back.
They just swing, go to the dugout, get by the Mr. Heater.
Yeah. So I mean, it was a waste of time. But for what I saw limited, it looked pretty good. Jacob, he started pitching, so I mean, he was the starting pitcher. So
he probably liked it because he was staying warm. He's moving.
Yeah. Since it was a scrimmage, we were trying to look at all the players, so he didn't get to pitch very long. He pitched one inning, he faced 4 batters, he struck out 3. And then he got back in the dugout, and he's like, Dad, I can't feel my arm. And then what was funny is all the kids that were fielding
Did you
the
say
ball,
that's okay? I can't feel mine either?
Yeah.
As you're having your
the
stroke?
whole infield, you could hear parents constantly yelling at their kids, like, get your hands out of your pockets. Because they're cold, so they're sticking their hands in their pockets. You can't feel the ball with the hand in your pocket. You're like, dude, it is
Let
cold.
it go by. Pick it up when it quits rolling.
I don't think the kids care because they're just like, whatever. Yeah. But,
I knew whenever I got out and about, and I knew that y'all had gone that morning down there, I was like, oh, my goodness.
Yeah, but so hopefully the next scrimmage will be much warmer weather. Speaking of passing, we had a sad last show. We talked about J.C. Johnson passing. We had another one, and this was somebody that we got to speak to on the show, John Anthony West.
Yeah.
That guy, this is a hard one for me. I mean, because I remember watching The Mysteries of Egypt or whatever when I was young, man. And that's where I first learned about the possibility of the Sphinx perhaps being older than what our Egyptologists are telling us when I saw John Anthony West and Robert Schoch doing their work about the water erosion.
Mm-hmm.
And we were lucky enough to speak to both those guys. In fact, just the other day, I went back after I heard that he passed away. I went back and listened to a few minutes of our interview with him.
When he says your name, how do you feel?
Yeah.
That's me. I'm so nostalgic.
Right?
Is when he said my name, and I will never forget that on the microphone before we hit record. We were talking to him, and he was like, hey, you know what? And you're just like, can't believe I'm talking to him.
It was such a pivotal moment for me because when we started the podcast, didn't know how well it would go. We didn't assume it would do well at all. And then I remember when we started having bigger guests on, and when we got to finally speak to John Anthony West, I think that was the most nervous I was of all the guests we had on because I don't know, I didn't want to screw up in front of him.
That was as I didn't want to sound like a dummy while I was talking to, and I sound like a dummy all the time. You'd think I'd be used to it, but I just didn't want to sound like it talking to John.
Yeah, but what a brilliant mind. It's sad when anybody passes, but especially somebody so great as John Anthony West.
We admire it so much. I hope he found some answers.
Yeah, right.
I hope he found some answers.
Well, let's get into the news. Cam, check this out. This was a guy named Bob who had a strange encounter back in 1964.
Hey, Bob.
In northern Wisconsin with what he thinks was a Bigfoot.
Yes.
He says, I never told this story to anyone but my family and maybe 3 other people. I'm now retired. I worked in science and technology. I don't really want to say exactly where. I'm sure you understand. Well, you see, I'm a skeptic of most things I hear about, but this happened to me back in 1964. My wife and I went out into the northern woods of Wisconsin looking for a place to go camping. Now understand, we weren't going camping, we were just looking for a good spot to go camping. I was going through some really tall, wide grass, and I saw a place up in front of me that looked like it was padded down. So, I was very leery. I went up there, and I peeked, and there's a bear in there, I thought. I told my wife to run and get my gun. She ran to the car. I ran over and swung up into a tree, and the bear was only maybe a first or second year bear. I didn't see the mother around or anything, so I was scared. I couldn't figure out what to do. So I'm standing there, looking at this bear, and I know bears climb trees, but this one wasn't trying to climb it. It looked like he was playing with me, and all of a sudden, a tree, a small tree, maybe 8 feet long, with dirt on one end, came flying out of the bushes and hit this bear in the rump. And boy, he took off. He ran under where I was in the tree, and I turned around and watched him disappear through the grass. I was ready to get down and out of the tree, and I turned around, and there was this thing just standing there. Up until this time, I'd never heard of a Bigfoot or anything like that. I grew up in a city in Ohio, and I'd never heard of such a thing. The first thing I really noticed was that it had 4 arms. It had 2 arms that were long, and it had 2 little arms that looked like it came out of the back of its neck.
Wait.
Yeah, you're hearing me right. And I think I froze. I don't know, but I looked at this creature in the eye. It had dark eyes, and its face and eyes were one of the most peaceful things I'd ever seen. And I just stood there on this limb, looking at it 10 feet away from me. The first thing that popped into my head was, it's an alien that had come from somewhere off of this world. I don't know how long I stared at it, but all my fear had left me, and I was just calm, standing there, looking at this creature. And my wife came running back from the car. I had told her to get my pistol out of the car, but it was the wrong car. It was in my other car. I wasn't going to shoot it. I was going to shoot at the bear and make a noise to make it run away. But anyway, when I looked over at my wife, I thought, oh my goodness, I'm not dreaming. And I looked back, and I see it turn and walk about another 10 feet away from me and go back into these bushes where there were these small trees, and then in back of that, there was a forest with big trees. Anyway, hanging on the back, what I thought was 2 extra arms was actually a baby hanging on the back of it, and it had a hold of the hair on the chest. It didn't look like anything from the ape family, I gotta tell you. I have a very good memory, and I took a picture, more or less unconsciously, of its face. I looked on the feet of the baby, and they were flat. It had toes like people's toes. It disappeared into the woods, and I'm just standing there. I'm stunned. My wife comes over and says, "Where's the bear?" I said, "It ran off." She said, "Why?" I said, "That tree. That tree came flying out of the bushes and hit him in the rear end, and he ran away." So what do you think of that story? It didn't really have 4 arms. You understand? It was the baby that was holding on to its back.
Yeah, I can understand that.
10
Backpacking
feet.
the baby, but a 10-footer? Whew.
And it didn't throw the tree at the guy. It threw it at the little baby, like, hey, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So even the Sasquatch mama,
Hey, baby.
yeah, it has the instinct to scold its young, like, get out of there.
Quit messing around. But when they start talking about the 10 feet, I always wonder if you could just tell it was a baby. What if it was the baby maybe sitting on top of its shoulders, you know?
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah, it's a strange. But 10-footer, like we always say, why is it there's a certain height limit that I have with Bigfoot?
I don't know. But I, for whatever reason, this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
It's not like Bigfoot is even a provenable, been proven to be a real animal. But for whatever reason, when I hear like 10 or 12 or 14 footers, I don't believe that. When I hear 6 feet, I'm like, yeah, I can believe that.
That's it.
But I have no justification as to why.
No, I'm always like,
yeah.
if they're a 10-footer, it'd be harder to hide than if you were 6 foot.
Yeah, I don't know why.
You'd stand out more. I'm with you. I don't understand why that is.
There's no logical reason.
Probably because we're not logical, but I've got this for you. Speaking of fun and craziness that we've been following up on and we've touched on through several shows and one just recently, but there is another sighting of a red-eyed winged humanoid seen in Forest Park, Chicago.
I know, another one, right?
Another one.
How many are we up to, like 64 now?
Last time I checked, 1,136,000.
But yeah, all jokes aside.
Well, and this is a great one. Yeah, this is because Manuel Neverett at the UFO Clearinghouse is the one that actually is involved in this one that sent it over. Now, get a load of this, folks. This is how it starts off. I was walking toward my apartment with my best friend and a girlfriend, and after getting off the Green Line train, and it was about 11 o'clock that evening, Friday night, February 2nd, 2018. And we were in the parking lot right next to the YMCA when we saw something land across the street from us. Now with the street light and the moonlight, it gave it some illumination and made it look like a tall man. But it had a very large pair of black wings. Now I know we had been drinking a little bit, but I was sober enough to know reality from a drunken hallucination. besides seeing this thing, it was enough to scare anyone sober. So seeing a man with wings, of course, was already freaky enough. But when we saw what could only be described as its eyes, well, that sent a chill through my body. The eyes were bright red and seemed to glow from within. Now, this thing looked at us for around 5 seconds before it spread the giant black wings, as wide as I'm guessing they could go, and started to flap. And it slowly gained altitude, and these wings flapped faster and faster until it was above the building and gone. And of course, now none of us could get back to my apartment fast enough, and then once we got inside, shut the door, bolted it, chained it, locked it all up, nothing. Now, this is one of the first ones that you hear where you can actually, they say the wings extended and then started flapping. Most of the time when it's either seen on the ground, it doesn't take flight, or when it does, it's one flap and then it sails away, or it just looks like it's gliding. This one seems like it's flapping to get flight.
You're right.
Like it's taking off on this whole thing there. Now, Manuel followed up on this whole deal, went and talked to the people. The man and the woman, both of them were in their late 20s. Both of them, they said, were professionals. They said they were well-educated professionals. Not, of course, that any of this matters. That's just the way it was. But they did say that they had been drinking, but not much. Like they had been out in the evening, just having a few drinks. Wasn't anything crazy. Now, it says going on, of course, to this, where they had gone, that this apartment of his was only about 3 blocks from the train station. So this whole, they're used to traveling this area. It's not like it would be something that had always been there and this was a new route and they saw it and was like, oh, hey. No, they'd traveled this a lot. Now, this is interesting. He said the thing was probably only about 6.5 feet tall. So it goes into it, like we were talking about, 6.5 footer. But said this, that it was skinny and very lanky. So it was almost like that emaciated idea of it, 6 footer, but it's real thin.
Yeah.
And of course it would have to be thin. You would think it wouldn't be a giant, thick, 400-pound gargoyle with wings flying around, but this little thing, and he guesses that the wingspan was that of 10 foot.
Yeah,
so,
that's, man, I don't know what are people saying. And like you mentioned earlier about, this is one of the first sightings where they mentioned the wings actually flapping versus it just soaring or something. It reminds me of that 1984 sighting or a few sightings of the Brentford Griffin, which took place in England.
Yeah.
The guy's name was like Kevin Chippendale or whatever. He saw it near these apartments. A woman saw it while on a bus, and then another guy wrote in and said that he had seen it a couple times when he was a kid. And this looked like a griffin, like the body of a lion with like a bird's head and wings. And in all those sightings, they never saw the wings flapping. Like it just looked like a static image, but moving. And you're always like, well, what is that?
Yeah.
Because if it's a physical being, it would have to flap its wings.
It would be movement.
Yeah.
They would be in all sorts of movement. Even you look at a bird, even when a bird's flying, their head's constantly turning. Their head's whipping around. There's constant movement, something. It's not just like completely motionless while it flies.
Well, that's what makes you wonder, like with the Brentford Griffin, was that a physical thing or was that just like an image, like a ghost that people were seeing? Yeah. So with this new winged creature that's in and around Chicago, is this thing physical or is it just an image? With the descriptions that we've been hearing, it sounds more physical.
Yeah,
But which is also terrifying in the fact that if it's physical, then what the heck is it?
I wonder if there's, of course, there's no way of knowing if there's anybody gone missing or murders or anything.
In Chicago?
No, this is what I'm getting at is,
I was going to say,
imagine,
maybe 30 a day?
Yeah, imagine that. But imagine that this is, of course, my crazy conspiracy mind going again. Ever since we've covered it, I've thought about it, is what if, this would make a great movie and like a great series. I wish somebody could do this. What if it was actually attacking and murdering people and the PD, there's powers that know and they're trying to catch it.
The Illuminati?
Without letting anybody else know. Like the PD and the sheriffs and whatever else is working on all this. The
Bilderbergs and the Clintons.
They've released it or whatnot. Yeah, that's the whole thing. Well, hey, before we jump into break, we've got a treat.
Yes.
Today. It was a treat for us.
I'm a big fan.
Well, yeah. Kyle and I have I guess we should actually put it on the website or put it somewhere on Facebook or something as a list of ongoing podcasts that we like and that we enjoy and things. And this is one of those ones that we come across this gem and it's fresh, it's brand new. And if you enjoy this show, I think you're really going to enjoy this next podcast. The podcast is called Haunted, folks, and it's done by a fella named Danny Robbins. Now, if you're not familiar with Danny, of course, anybody that's listening to this that's in the UK may be familiar with Danny, otherwise may not. Danny is no stranger to knowing his way around journalism, knowing his way around broadcasting, television. I'll give you a rundown right now. He's a scriptwriter, broadcaster, journalist. He's in London. He's also done TV and radio comedy shows. He did We Are History, The Museum of Everything, Young Dracula, The Cold Swedish Winter. All this stuff was on BBC Radio 4. So he's had a bunch of these things going on. And this is what he does. He takes stories that are told directly to him by people that have had these strange, ghostly sightings, and he sits down and interviews them. And then he follows up on it. He will go with them, if they can't, go to the places where it's happened. And it's not like your crazy, over-the-top mountain monster type stuff. We're not talking about that. We mean like a journalistic approach to this with top-notch audio quality.
Yeah, it's excellent. It's excellent. If you're a big fan of ghosts or spirits, or if you're a fan of this show, you're going to like this one. It's called Haunted. Now, not Haunted Places. There's another podcast called Haunted Places.
Just Haunted.
Just Haunted. And it's excellent. The first season's out.
Yeah, I think he did 12 episodes. It's wonderful. So let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to introduce you to Danny and just let Danny explain it all to you, folks. You're listening to Expanded Perspectives. All right, guys, here we go with a friend of ours, I guess you could say across the pond. This fella has stepped into the podcasting world and swinging a big bat has knocked it out of the park.
Yeah.
Has crushed one. Mr. Danny Robbins of the Haunted Podcast. Danny, how are you doing, man?
Hello, I'm very good, thank you.
Thanks for jumping on here with us. The show is amazing. It is really, like we were discussing off air, you don't normally find, it's hard to find shows that are great with the storytelling, have great background, have like in-studio interviews with the people that this has happened to, where you can speak on this later, where you can kind of, you're looking them in the face whenever you can see them going through these emotions and all this stuff. And I guess before we get really too far into it, we ought to just tell them that you interview people that have had ghostly encounters and then lots of times go and do a little research into it yourself, correct?
I do, and I think that's kind of what drew me to doing this kind of show, that I guess I describe myself as a people person. I've always enjoyed talking to people and making contacts with people. And I know there's a lot of shows out there, and a lot of very good shows that people enjoy, which is one person telling a ghost story, telling a sort of folkloric story to a microphone in a room. And, you know, I'm not knocking that, but for me, I wanted to do something where I got out and about and sort of met the people that it happened to. And like you said, when you look the person in the eye and you hear directly from them about their experience, then it adds another layer. It makes the story all the weirder, I guess. You know, I think for me, the great test when hearing these stories was, if I looked this person in the eye, was I convinced? Did I feel they were telling me, you know, their truth, what they believed to be the truth? And certainly pretty much in all of our cases, I did.
Well, it's funny you say that. When you're listening to some of these interviews, it's like what we have talked about, is you can hear in their voices that there's something there. Like you can tell that there is like a disturbance, like something has affected that person. And you get into some really, I don't even know I couldn't really say risque. I mean, just some real, there was one about the thing in the attic that we'll get into later, but that one was more along of the apartheid. And I mean, that really hit on a lot of notes for people to have a horrible feeling about it. Because the man talks about, he didn't understand what he had seen, didn't understand, I guess, the history given with that doll. And then there's a lot of threads to that story that I really, really enjoyed. Like I said, we'll get into that later, because I got a question I want to ask you. I know that you were involved in television and that you were involved in radio. And I don't mean, folks, when I say involved, I mean like Danny's had a good run. So it's not like it was just just like, oh yeah, I got to run a broom on a soundstage. No. It's not like that. Playwriting, writing a bunch of screenwriting, stuff like this. We're talking about really digging in. What made you decide to get into podcasting? Before we even get into your podcast, What brought you down that line?
It's a good question. Certainly not the money. I think I started listening to a lot of podcasts, and I think as probably most people listening to your show will identify with this, but they are addictive, and you do find yourself burning through these podcasts, binge listening to them. And I was just really interested, as somebody who's worked with audio all my life, all my career, making lots of BBC programs, radio programs for Radio 4, which is the main speech station here in the UK. And I just was really interested in how with a podcast, you tell a story in a different way and it becomes much more personal. And I think there is this very intense relationship between the program maker and the listener with audio, full stop. I think, with radio or podcasting, it's a different relationship to television. You draw people in and you develop this real loyalty between the audience and the person. And I just think that podcasting really goes above and beyond. It kind of blows radio out of the water in terms of that kind of relationship. And I just love that. And since I've started making this podcast, I'm just really kind of touched and blown away by all the people who've been in contact and the kind of community that develops around the show. And I mean, you guys must feel that as well. I mean, I know you've got a really big community around your show, and it's quite a lovely thing, isn't it, to build up this thing and to have kind of, you become one of people's podcasts. People say to me like, you're one of my podcasts now, you've made it into my podcast, and I think that's a lovely thing to kind of, to produce something that somebody wants to commit such a large chunk of their time to, if you're talking about binge listening a podcast, you're maybe spending kind of, possibly even like sort of 10 hours a week listening to someone's voice. So that's quite a special thing for me.
You bring it up. Kyle and I couldn't agree more, because it's one of those, lots of times you don't ever get to ever interact with your audience. Your voice is in their ears and that's it. So you don't get to, like actors or actresses, when you go to these, these meet and greets and go to these award shows and stuff, podcasters don't have that. So when we get the emails that people send, as I'm sure you've received, and they talk about, like you said, you're in my list, or you're one of my favorite, or I've been binging on your show. It is the ultimate compliment. It is the one thing that nothing makes you feel any better. You're like, it is just awesome to know that people really enjoy listening to it. I like though that what you said is it feels more intimate with a podcast. And I guess it does, is without having the radio, it kind of gives you the freedom. So I guess that's what you experienced when you got into podcasting. You found a freedom that maybe you didn't have before.
Well, I think so. And I think also it brilliantly suits ghost stories, because I'm not quite sure how our show would work as a visual thing, as a TV program. I mean, I'm sure, if someone came in and laid down some serious Hollywood money, then we'd find a way. But but I think that it works perfectly as an audio piece. And I think that we create this soundscape. People who've heard the show will know we use a lot of music and sound effects to really bring the stories to life. And I think that, when you're in someone's ears, and some people tell me that actually listening to the show in the dark by themselves in their house, they actually have to stop listening at moments because they freak themselves out so much. And I found, like, even when I was editing the show, that I'd have moments where I'd make myself jump, and I think, so that's nice. That's something that you can really do with audio. I'm not sure that you'd have quite the same impact if you could see everything. The mind painting this picture through the sounds is great. And I think when I look at shows like Us and Law, and there's a whole host of, and Haunted Places, there's a whole host of paranormal shows out there, I sort of see us as continuing this tradition of oral ghost stories, of the telling of a ghost story. And you think about things like Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol, and the M.R. James stories people might know, the British writer from the 1920s. And, they were written to be told out loud, to be read out loud. And I see us as kind of continuing that for the digital age, that here we are kind of getting real people to tell their stories out loud. And our listeners are off on their commute or jogging through the park, but this ghost story is in their ears and freaking them out.
That's what Kyle and I've always said, is theater of the mind.
Yeah.
That's what you try to lay out, is a good theater of the mind, and let people build it, just like reading a book. The only difference is you're the storyteller, and then their book is still being played out in their mind on their own. And that's what I think makes it, like you said, you're going to have to only edit during the daytime, because there's times when you're editing the show where you do, Kyle and I have had it happen, where you're just like, okay, I got to take a little break, a little second. I was getting a little too deep into that one.
No, totally. I've found since I've kind of immersed myself in ghost stories that I'm constantly freaking myself out at moments. And actually, just to talk to you guys tonight, I've had to walk to the bottom of my quite long, very dark garden, because it's nighttime where I am right now in London. And I've walked down to the bottom of my dark garden into my little office shed at the bottom, and there are foxes around me and squirrels on the roof. And, you know, it's all I can say is it's the perfect setting to be talking about ghosts right now.
It is set. It's perfect. Yeah. Okay. So what made you, I guess, decide to go with the ghost stories? Have you been fascinated as a child, as you were growing up and involved? And I'm sure in the business you were in, you were gathering stories from other people. Is there, you know, because there's always something that sets somebody in motion, sets them in this certain direction. Or was it simply because of what you had did with radio and the things that you've done, is you recognized great stories, so you decided to go that way?
I've asked myself a lot why I've become so obsessed about this. And I think that it lies really in the kind of depths of childhood. And I was brought up by a mum who had been brought up a Catholic, and then she was an atheist. And so I was brought up without any religion, any belief in our house. But I'd go to my grandparents and I'd see all these kind of old Catholic pictures up on the walls, the Sacred Heart and popes and stuff like that. And I'd be fascinated by this idea of belief and you know, this kind of the kind of magic, I guess, of religion and spirituality. And I just kind of, I think I was always interested in the idea that there might be something out there that I didn't know about, and that maybe the kind of the realms of my existence in my, you know, my atheist world of no belief, maybe there was something more out there. And I think that sort of, I didn't go down the religion line, but I think I did go down the supernatural line. I kind of became interested in ghosts and the idea that there was something out there. And I think, you know, I find myself, I'm quite careful with our show to kind of not come down particularly strongly on what I believe myself, because I feel like I get skeptics telling me it's a skeptic show, and I get believers telling me it's a believers show, and it seems like the show's enjoyed by both camps equally, which I love. So I never sort of really come out and say where I stand. I kind of straddle those two things. But I do think that I'd hate to see a world without ghosts. When I talk to skeptics and they kind of try and sort of, you know, kind of stamp ghosts out of existence and give you all of the kind of science that kind of will eradicate ghosts, I kind of think, don't go there. You know, we need this in our world. You know, we need a sense of magic and mystery, and, you know, the fact that there might be something that we don't understand. So I'm drawn by all those things. And I'm sure you kind of identify what I'm saying, that idea that, you know, that there is always something just out of your grasp, you know, something just around the corner that you might not quite understand.
I'm with you. I'm glad. We always say is like, we don't ever want Bigfoot found. There's a lot of stuff that you wish would be real, but you don't want them really found, because it's fun to have that mystery. It's fun to always have that yearning for there to be something really, really wild going on. Okay. So all of that, I guess before I get into the stories, have you had anything that changed your mind yet so far? Like from the very first interview you did in October up until, say, the show that you released at the end of December, did any of your ideals change after meeting with certain people?
I keep an open mind, and I find myself kind of vacillating between the two sides, I think. And, you know, I read a load of stuff from skeptic authors, from people like Richard Wiseman and, you know, Chris French, and lots of the kind of skeptics out there who give very impressive and very well explained reasons why people see ghosts. You know, there are a lot of kind of amazing scientific reasons for why we see ghosts that are kind of as weird and as mysterious as the idea of ghosts. So I you know, as I immersed myself in that, I found myself becoming very convinced and sort of thinking, yeah, you can explain a lot of this stuff away. And then as I went off and met lots of people who believed they'd seen ghosts, you find yourself kind of going, wow, but, you know, this person is totally convincing. I'm looking at this person in their eyes. I don't think they're mad, and I don't think they're lying. And so they've seen something. And what is that? And so, you know, that there is nothing more convincing in a ghost story than a good storyteller. It's all about the person telling the story. And if you trust that person, then you are left in this quandary where you're sort of being pulled between rationality and science, and just that belief that you see in the person's eyes.
Yeah, I love these episodes, and I want to ask you about a specific one, actually. When you started out, the one that's called The House That Had to Be Sold, where a woman named Noreen and her, I guess they were newlyweds with her husband, they had moved into this dream house, and they started witnessing some strange activity, and we've talked about it before on our show, these things that are known in the Muslim world as the jinn. What could you tell us about that case? How did you find these two individuals? And could you, I guess, tell our audience a little bit about that case?
Yeah, sure. Well, this was the first one we recorded, and it was it was our pilot. It was the one that convinced us we could make a show out of this.
And I interpreted it immediately as this thing was sending me a warning. This thing was showing me that it could come that close to harming my child.
Now you're talking about a thing that was trying to harm your daughter. So was that the first moment you believed?
That's the first moment when I put it all together and I thought, there's no rational explanation, and this now feels personal. It's almost like something was...
It was coming to get you.
It was coming, yeah.
And I'd gone round to meet a friend who had a ghost story to tell me, and she told me this amazing ghost story, and then she said, but I don't want to be on your show, I don't want to be recorded. And I was like, oh no. And then her mate came over, and her friend said, oh, you're looking for ghost stories? I've got a story. And this was Noreen, and she told me this story. And as she told it to me, the hair stood up on my neck, and all those classic signs of a good ghost story. And basically, she and her husband had moved into this house as newlyweds, as you said, and very quickly, strange things were happening. Objects seemed to be flying across the kitchen. A baby sterilizer, one of those things you use to sterilize pacifiers and bottles for babies. The lid seemed to fly across the room. The husband's electric toothbrush switched itself on upstairs. He was hit by flying stones in the garden. All sorts of strange things. A strange bruise appeared on their daughter's face, and then as soon as they left the house, it mysteriously disappeared. And it was a really interesting case because nobody could prove or disprove what had happened because it had happened in the past. It had happened to these two people, so we only had their word to go on. But the things they described were very, very strange and very creepy. But also, what emerged was that there was lots of interesting things to do with the dynamics of their relationship, and also the fact that Noreen's mother played a big role in it, and that Noreen's mother had a real strong desire for Noreen to not leave home and to not move out, and so there was lots of kind of the personal kind of floating around the background as well, the kind of people stoking other people's fear, and did you really see something, or did you just think you saw something because that person said they saw something? So for me, that was kind of the blueprint for our show, that there was definite strange weirdness going on, but there was also a lot of interesting psychology. And I think the thing about Haunted is I find myself as interested in the people as I am in the ghosts. And I always think that, half the story is what they saw and half the story is about them and the sort of backdrop to it, who they are. Because sometimes, there are many reasons why we see ghosts, and some are definitely kind of in the realms of what people would call the sort of anomalously unexplained, but some definitely lie within us ourselves.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. You actually spoke to a psychologist, I believe, on that episode, where he was trying to explain it as they had a recent burglar had tried to break into their home, and they were in a new place, and that kind of fed on their emotions, and that's what they were experiencing. But you even mentioned in your episode that when you were talking to Noreen and her husband, that you saw the look on their face, and this wasn't them just with an overactive imagination because of a burglar or a previous break-in, that they had witnessed, with objects flying across the room. Noreen's mother had seen a girl at like a party or something who wasn't standing there. I think her husband's father had stayed the night, and he didn't want to say anything.
Yeah, they've both seen this character, the White Lady, a lady dressed all in white that had appeared just in the bedroom with the father-in-law, and then appeared at a family party as well. There was definitely strange things, and I think this for me was an episode that showed the power of fear. And one of the things I found most interesting making the series was about the fact that ghosts don't always scare people. In fact, you asked me before if I really learned something, if I changed my opinion about something. And it was definitely this. I always thought the idea of seeing a ghost was terrifying. And I still do. I still think if I woke in the night and I saw a ghost, if I saw a ghost in my room, I would be terrified. But the people on our show pretty much divided 50-50 between those like Noreen and Fawad, who were absolutely terrified. And, you know, their fear stays with them now. They will never forget what happened. And then the other 50% were people who were not scared, who were kind of very fine with the idea of the ghost being in their house. There was one guy, an episode we did called The Woman in the Corner, and he had a woman, what seemed to be the ghost of a woman, walking across his room, his bedroom, and getting into bed with him. And he wasn't scared by it. And, you know, so for me, that was one of the most interesting and odd things, the idea that, you know, you might see a ghost and not be scared.
I was just lying in bed, just half asleep, I think, kind of awake. I could feel someone else in the room, and I could hear, all of a sudden, someone crossing the room, slippers shuffling on the carpet. And I thought, hello? I actually said hello, and there was someone standing in the corner of the bedroom, just looking at me. She was a lady, she was thin, and it was very dark. She had long black hair down to her waist as far as I could make out. And I said, hello, hello, hello.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that episode. I was specifically thinking about that one, how you were even talking about how the quilt would be moved in the morning and stuff. And he seemed totally fine with it. He's like, I remember you asking him, like, you're not disturbed by someone getting in bed with you. He was like, no, not really. It was almost as if he was alone. He seemed like a lonely person, and he almost would rather have, even as funny as it sounds, a ghost to share his bed than no one at all. You know what I mean?
No, definitely. And I think, you know, I like to think that at the end of an episode, we leave people with different possible explanations. You know, so in that case, you know, the skeptic can listen to that episode and read it as a man who kind of generated a ghost out of his loneliness. And the believer will see a ghost that kind of comforted him in his loneliness. And I think that gets to the heart of ghost belief, you know, that I think that, you know, we as people need ghosts. And, you know, we either, if you're coming from a skeptic point of view, we need them and we create them in our own image. We kind of, we invent our own ghosts. And if you're coming at it from a believer's point of view, then we need ghosts because they come and they fulfill various functions in society. You know, they pass on messages, they comfort us, you know, they help us when we're grieving, you know. So I think, you know, the ghost is in the kind of eye of the beholder, if you like, you know, that, you know, whether you're a skeptic or a believer, you bring your own thing to the table.
Well, Danny, you did a show that brought up something that I had never even thought of when it starts coming into this paranormal stuff. And you probably know exactly which one I'm talking about, is the racist ghost.
Okay. Yeah.
That would have never crossed. I don't know why I never put two and two together. I would never thought that.
Yeah, that someone's prejudice would carry into the afterlife.
Into the afterlife. I never would have thought that. But that story is, well, all of them are strange, but it's just one of those that really hit me crazy. Can you tell them about that?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating story. I mean, I knew we were going to make this story about a ghost that seemed to be racist. I Googled racist ghosts, and I was thinking there must be racist ghosts out there. There must be. You know, there've been so many racist people throughout history that there must be. And I just really couldn't find much evidence of it. So I don't know if it is. It doesn't seem to be a thing, at least. But so our story involved a very domestic haunting. It was in a house very close to where I live in East London, an old Victorian house near to a creepy old reservoir, so a perfect setting for a ghost story. And it was in the 1970s, and it was a family, and the mother would go down to the kitchen every morning, see a little old lady in her kitchen who didn't live there, the ghost of an old lady, say hello. The old lady would say hello to her. The mum would say hello back, and then the old lady would disappear.
Come downstairs.
So walks down the steps into the kitchen at the back of the house.
Yeah.
And then, in the middle of what should be an empty room.
There's an old lady sitting on a chair who says good morning to my mum.
And what does your mum do at this point?
She said good morning. She replies back. She because she's like half asleep. She goes to the kettle, turns it on, turns around, and she's gone. It took my mum totally by surprise because it's not something you expect to see. Somebody come down into your kitchen and there's somebody sitting there.
And was this just a one-off event?
Once that started happening, that was sort of like the catalyst for it all beginning.
And so how often was this happening?
It was getting to the stage where it was sort of like expected.
Months and months of living with a ghost, walking into the kitchen every morning and seeing a ghost in your kitchen?
Yeah. My mum saw practically every day.
And this happened every morning. And she also felt the old lady was talking to the daughter. The 2-year-old daughter was talking about the Second World War and mentioning Hitler and bombs and all sorts of things like that. And so that was weird enough in itself. That was a good ghost story in itself. But then, after the family moved out, they started getting reports that this little old lady was still appearing, and she was chasing out the people who'd moved in after them. And that she was particularly focusing on people of an Asian background, people from India and Pakistan who'd moved to the house, and that she was a racist ghost forcing the immigrants out. And what got even more interesting at this point, which was that I did a bit of digging. I went to look through the local history archive and found the electoral registers. So we had these big old books of all the people who'd been registered as voters in this house. And I went through the electoral register and looked at all the names of the people who lived there. And I couldn't find any evidence of any Indian or Pakistani people living in this house. So what it seemed to have happened was that this domestic haunting in the hands of the local community had kind of become this urban legend, and that it reflected the fact that this was a period in London in the 1970s when a lot of people were coming from India and Pakistan and moving to London. And it was a kind of time of great change, and a time when some people were unsettled, and there were kind of racist far-right marches on the streets, and it was a time of great sort of social upheaval. And it seemed like the community had been kind of projecting their anxieties and their prejudices onto this little old lady ghost. So at the end of it, this guy I'd been talking to told me the story. He sort of he'd spent his whole life thinking that this old lady had been a racist ghost. And I said to him that, maybe she wasn't. It seems like from the evidence that there was no evidence of her chasing people out. So in a way, he sort of felt like we'd redeemed his ghost. I think he was quite pleased at the end that the little old lady who'd come and visited their house wasn't as nasty as he'd thought.
I guess there's a lot of those stories to where people kind of project themselves on, or their ideas onto the intentions of what they thought they saw.
Well, definitely, because if we see something, we're projecting loads onto it, aren't we? Even if, the skeptic would say, you're projecting everything onto it. But even if you're a believer, you have to acknowledge that you're putting loads of your cultural knowledge, the sort of historical backdrop, everything you know about ghosts goes into that sighting. So you see this flash of white running across the pathway. You know that you're in an old haunted mansion, and that you know a bit about the person who owned the mansion, and suddenly you believe that was the ghost of that person. And we have no knowledge if it was at all. It could be the ghost of anyone who ever lived in that place, or it could be just a flash of light, But we're constantly putting things onto ghosts, I think. But I think what one of the things that interested me about that whole concept of a racist ghost was that I got into this really interesting conversation with a guy called Roger Clark, who is a writer about ghosts. He's written this brilliant book called A Natural History of Ghosts that I would really recommend people seeking out. And he was talking about how a lot of spiritual mediums, a lot of psychics, believe that when a person goes into the afterlife, they lose their prejudices and that they become kind of, I guess, a nicer person. That death kind of cleanses your soul, and you shed all the hate. So he was saying, from a medium's point of view, that wouldn't be possible, a racist ghost. But then we got talking about other theories from other people, parapsychologists, who believe that a ghost is like a sort of shard of a personality, a kind of fragment of the person. And that, you could have a situation where there was somebody who, had this racist streak, and that in death it became heightened and magnified, and it became, that was kind of all that was left of them. So that is, I mean, for me, that's a kind of, you could talk about that forever. That's a really fascinating idea that, what happens to our personalities and our prejudices when we die.
Well, and you're right, is there's been all these tales about men attacked by like poltergeists in their homes and the wives left untouched, like maybe that was a female ghost or something. So if they can carry the poltergeist style hatred, you would think that they would be able to carry some sort of racist hatred with them.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, and you would think that, if we believe that ghosts are generated by places where, very strong emotions have been felt, where violence has happened, obviously racism goes hand in hand with that. There have been some, awful, unspeakable acts of violence in the name of racism. It's certainly in the realms of one of the strongest emotions you could have, and to be either, someone giving out racism or to be on the receiving end of racism, it's an incredibly sort of strong and awful moment. So you'd think that if you believe that ghosts are generated by that kind of thing, you'd think, well, yeah, it makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when it comes to speaking of ghosts around places that generate a lot of emotion, probably none is higher than a hospital. And on a recent episode, you talked about an episode called The Night Shift, about some happenings to a nurse there. Could you tell us about that?
Sure. I mean, I often wonder why there aren't more ghost sightings in hospitals, because there is a strand. I kind of learnt talking to this nurse that there is a real strand of nurses having had sightings. Most nurses you talk to seem to have had some sort of supernatural experience. But in terms of like the sort of general, populace, most of us, people seem to much more often see ghosts in kind of old buildings, haunted mansions, castles, old abbeys, certainly here in the UK, than in a hospital. And yet our hospital is where most people die. Most people don't die at home now. Most people die in hospitals. So you'd think there'd be loads of ghosts there. And yeah, this was a really interesting story. It took place in the Middlesex Hospital in London, which no longer exists. It's been knocked down now, totally erased. But it was known as a very famous teaching hospital, and it was where the first ever AIDS ward was opened in the UK. And Princess Diana opened this AIDS ward. There was a very famous picture of her embracing an AIDS patient, and it really changed the way people thought about AIDS here in the UK.
It's a tale that will take me from a hospital in central London in the early 90s to this remote spot in Scotland. I'll be meeting skeptics and believers as I try to get to the bottom of a 25-year-old mystery that includes a poltergeist, a strange apparition, and a group of terrified nurses who all witnessed the same seemingly impossible thing. I'm Danny Robbins, and this is Haunted. Do ghosts exist? If not, why do we see them?
Am I the only one that's seen this? No, I'm not, because Denise has seen it and Lisa's seen it, and we're clutching each other.
Malevolent experiences, objects moving, a sense of dread, drop in temperature, multiple witnesses. This could be the holy grail of hauntings.
It just travelled across the width of the ward, and then it went out through the wall. Just disappeared.
How did you feel?
Oh my God, I was so scared.
And so this lady, Bridget, had been a nurse in this hospital. This took place in the kind of early 90s. And she'd lost a patient. The patient died, and she felt a lot of guilt about the fact that he died a fairly painful death. She felt that he should have been put out of his misery earlier, that he'd been left to kind of malinger too long, to kind of go on too long. And so she kind of felt uneasy about his passing. And I think that this was ticking away in the back of her mind. And then just very strange things started happening. There was strange noises from the room where he passed away. And then in the morning, they'd find things thrown all across the room that seemed to have been thrown across an empty room, a kind of locked empty room. And no one knew how these papers and files had been chucked across the room. And the alarm bell would keep going off, the buzzer that the patients press when they have a problem, the buzzer next to his bed, an empty bed, but the bed he died in, kept ringing. And so that was the start of it. And then, I mean, I don't want to sort of say too much because I'd love people to go off and listen to the episode, which is called The Night Shift. But it got weirder and weirder. And there was sort of, there was 3 or 4 of these nurses who we're experiencing this together, and that was, for me, what kind of, talking about knocking things out the park. This was what really knocked the story out the park, because most of our stories involved one person seeing something, and you had to take one person's word for it. But this was 3 or 4 nurses, people who were trained to be rational, scientific people, and they'd all seen these very, very strange things. They'd seen an apparition. They'd had this sense of opening a room and having loads of strange phenomena going on in this room. And yeah, I mean, it was one where I had a parapsychologist on, and he offered lots of different reasons for things. But, almost the more reasons he offered for all these different things, the more it stacked up. The more improbable it seemed that all of these reasons would be true all at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. I'm glad you said that, because I was thinking the same thing as a listener listening to it. And also the house that had to be sold, that episode. I mean, the parapsychologist was talking about, like I talked about, they had a theft, a burglar tried to break in their house, and maybe that had caused them to imagine some of the things that were going on there. But, the woman's mother and the husband's father both saw things, so they wouldn't have been affected by the burglaries, and things like that. So, and with this, there's so many different people in the hospital all seeing strange things. I don't know that you can dismiss that. I don't know.
No, I think, I like to think that what makes our show appeal to both skeptics and believers is that there are 2 ways to explain things, but one way will always be more satisfying to you depending on what you believe. So I think, if you're a hardened skeptic, you'll listen to the parapsychologist and you'll say, all of these reasons, they all make sense. And yes, it seems strange that all these things would come together at once, but, strange things happen. And sometimes all these kind of odds align, and all these very kind of natural phenomena happen, and that explains your ghost. And if you're a believer, you'll say, well, there's no way it would all happen together in one go. That's just not probable. And you have to believe this woman. She saw the thing. We have to go with that. And I think I say sort of long live that, if you like. I love the fact that you can explain this in more than one way. And I love the fact that we leave it on a kind of ambiguous note. And I set out to very definitely say at the beginning of this, I would never ever try and debunk someone. I would never ever sort of try and make someone feel silly for anything, for what they believe in. I always want people to kind of feel that they're telling their story in a safe space. And at the end of it, our audience will make their own decisions. They'll have their own views.
That's right.
But, for me, I always feel like at the end of it, there's a genuine mystery. I can't explain all these stories.
Well, you do a fantastic job. I suggest everybody go over there and download Haunted. Danny, tell people where they can find your show, and if they have any stories of their own they'd like to share with you, how do they get a hold of you?
Well, definitely. So you can find our story, our podcast, on iTunes by searching for Haunted, or Google Play and all the other places where people find podcasts, or also we're on Panoply, which is Panoply, and you can go to the Panoply website or use their streaming service and find the show. But yeah, we want ghost stories, and I can't say this enough. We're really keen to hear people's ghost stories. We've had some really good stories come in so far from listeners. At the end of every episode, we always put out the email address, which I'll give now, which is haunted@panoply.fm. So that's haunted@panoply.fm. Or they can find me, look for me on Facebook and Twitter. And yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear your stories. And if you listen to the show, you'll know that, we treat things in a kind of sensitive, thoughtful way. And if you've had a strange experience, we'll try and help you kind of explain it, and we'll listen, and we'll kind of, help you tell your story.
Absolutely. Do you have any upcoming events, or you have any meet and greets coming up or anything like that?
Well, we're newbies to this, and we're sort of still finding our way with the whole kind of what you do with a podcast. So I think we want to be a lot more interactive next time. We've made 10 now as kind of our season 1, and then we're coming back soon with more for season 2. And I think we're planning to be much more interactive. We're going to set up a proper kind of forum, kind of Facebook group where people can talk and discuss the stories. And yeah, we're planning some live events that, at the moment it'll be UK based. We'd love to get across to the States in some form. And we are hoping to come across to the States to kind of record some stories as well. So kind of watch this space, I guess. And kind of, if you follow me on Twitter, I'll try and sort of keep people up to date with what's going on. But Yeah, I mean, and let us know as well. If you enjoy the show, let us know what you'd like us to do. And, we're new to the whole podcast game and we're kind of feeling our way. Well, so we're kind of up for suggestions.
Well, you wouldn't know that you were new. I mean, you guys do a fantastic job, and I'm sure you're going to have a large audience at these meet and greets soon, so you better get ready for that. What a fantastic show, and it was really great getting to talk to you today, and thank you so much for coming on.
Well, it's been a pleasure, and I love your show too. I really enjoy it a lot, so it means a lot to come on.
All right, thanks, Danny. And we're back with Expanded Perspectives. What an interesting interview. I had such a good time talking to Danny. He's an excellent guy. He's an excellent journalist, and he's an excellent podcaster. I know he talks about how he just started podcasting, but he's got a big background in radio and things. But I told him, man, you are killing it. You're doing an excellent job. You're doing so good. Because it's not just the way he tells the story, but the sound effects, the way the mixing's done.
It's great.
It's fantastic.
I love it. I really do. And it's one of those things I was like, well, could I pick? Which is my favorite episode? Was it like we talked about the house that had to be sold, or is it, the thing in the attic? I don't know which one's my favorite because I don't think I can. And there's only 12. You could be like, okay, I could rank them 1 through 12, but I can't because each one of them, I don't know. I guess what, for me, podcasting, as I like from episode 1 to episode 12, is it is a constant. Like he's very professional and it's constant. I don't know that there is a favorite. I don't think I could actually drag a favorite out. But for those of you that were going crazy because we didn't ask him, about certain things, on the Elite Show, he stuck around. We asked him some more stuff on the Elite Show coming up. So if you couldn't get enough, and those of you elitists, you'll get to hear it. If not, and you're thinking about being an elitist, maybe you want to tune in, check it out. You'll get to hear Danny go into some more things, the things that he'd happened to. Stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of the one episode he did called The Racist Ghost.
Yeah.
I like the idea because I'd never really contemplated ever that when a person dies, if their prejudices are taken with them into the afterlife. I just never thought of it. It turns out that it probably does, and why wouldn't it? It makes perfect sense, right?
Well, and I like how he's even touched on, and they talked about it, that maybe it doesn't follow you, but maybe it's a sliver that's left over.
Yeah, right.
Maybe that's what's left behind. Is something
and
like
it makes
that.
sense, and it's been right there in front of me the whole time. I just never thought about it. You read these stories where this guy's like a terrible person. He's a drunk. He's an alcoholic. He beats his kids and wives. He passes on, and then his spirit is troublesome for the next person living there.
For like a poltergeist.
Yeah,
that's
he's
what I brought up.
Just a jerk, because he was like that in his real life. I would think the same thing happens if you're racist towards a particular group. I think in this case it was Asian, Indian or Pakistan. It would only make sense that the spirit or ghost would be the same way.
Yeah.
Doesn't like that particular group. And he said that building or that apartment, I don't remember exactly, kind of built up its own lore around it. Like in the community, people knew that thing was haunted by like a racist ghost.
It's so crazy.
It's an interesting idea, right?
Yeah, it is. It is.
Another thing I like the fact is a lot like this show. He doesn't try to prove whether ghosts are real or not. He leaves it up to you to decide. Whether you're on either side of the fence, it doesn't matter. I think you'll find enjoyment in these stories. And he also brings up the fact that podcasts kind of are like a digital age. In a digital age, is this ongoing storytelling that human beings have been doing for a long, long time. Whether it was 200 years ago, people still like to get around and have somebody read a good book or tell a story. A spooky story, especially.
Oh, yeah.
And that's basically what we're doing, as well as other podcasts. I never really thought about it in that way, but it makes a lot of sense. No wonder people like us and him have such success with these shows, is because people, whether they're jogging or working or commuting in their car or just sitting at home, people like a good story.
Yeah.
And I also like the fact that it doesn't work the same if there was video. If with actual images, it doesn't work as good. Listening to it, for whatever reason, there's a better connection. It's like reading a good book where you're hearing the story, but your mind is creating. So if me and Cam listen to the same story, or you listen to it, your idea of what this thing looks like or ghost or whatever is completely different than what his might. Or
just like reading a book. It's just great.
It's the same thing. And I think that's why podcasts are doing so well. They're growing. I mean, I remember when we started, it seemed like there was a lot of podcasts, but now, holy cow.
Oh, it's crazy.
Tenfold.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I mean, just in the genre of ghosts, there's probably 1,000 podcasts.
Yeah.
Separate ones.
And it's great. Like, you can find the one thing, like even he brought up, talking about true crime. You look in the true crime section of podcast, and it is blowing up faster than probably any other genre of podcast.
Yeah. So we strongly suggest you go over there and check that out. You're going to like it. It's called Haunted. I'll put links to it in the show notes, but you can find it on iTunes anywhere. Just Google Haunted.
Yeah.
And what is it? What is the name of the company that's...
Panoply?
Yeah. I'll put links to all that.
Before we go on any further, too, I got to give a shout-out to Queen Mummy and You, Rocky Vanren, W.D. Einert, Bowsel, Izzy Tunes, and Isabella 841. And am I going to stop there? No. Tiag BMW, John Pickard, Nighthawk, H.M. Cassidy, Suit Daddy, H.M. iOS, Hamas, I guess. I don't know. iOS Vista, Shioma, and Be the Attack. And that's it for right now. Those are all of our reviews. I'm still going back through them, trying to get caught up to 2018. I'm fixing to be into May of 2017. So like we said, if we get you, if not, write another one and I'll get you when you get to it. But thank y'all all so much for writing all the reviews.
Keep those reviews coming, man.
It's helping out tremendously. It just keeps going and going. I love opening it up and checking them out, and y'all writing such sweet things. Really does mean a lot to Kyle and I, a whole lot. We've got some other interesting stuff coming up. Like I said, we're going to have Danny, and then following that, we're going to have an interview with the Seven Ages crew. I believe we're going to have them come on and talk, because Kyle and I were going to be out of town. So be watching Facebook and Instagram, and I might post some stuff on Twitter, but we're going to be doing some of the videos for the new video thing, and then we're going to be doing a show, probably just Kyle and I. We might even try to get his brother or something involved in some of this while we're sitting around up there and see whatnot.
Yeah, we'll see. Don't forget, if you want to hear the continuation of our interview with Danny Robbins, you got to join Elite. You can go to the website, expandedperspectives.com. Click on the Elite tab, and signing up is easy. It's $5 a month. You'll get an additional show every week, as well as access to the entire back catalog. Quite a deal for only $5. If you have a story of your own you'd like to share with either Danny or us, you can email him, or you can email us at expandedperspectives@yahoo.com. If you have a story you'd like to tell, it's 817-945-3828 is the phone number. Cam, what do you got planned for the short week we're going to have?
I have got a ridiculous amount of work to cram into the next 2.5 days. It is going to be, I may have to work late a few, I don't know. I kind of expected it for us to get it done. It always does. But it will be fun, and then we'll get ready to start rolling out. So.
I'm in the same boat. I'm in the exact same boat. I'm procrastinating. I'm not even going to jack with the tax man until I get back from this trip because I hate doing that. I always procrastinate.
I don't want it to ruin my trip.
Right? That's me. I don't want to be bummed out the whole time. I don't want to be sitting on the chairlift thinking, oh, God, how big of a check do I have to write this time? You know what I mean?
That's it. Yeah.
Out of sight, out of mind. I'm going to go to a specialty shop there. I got some lower back pain, and
we're for sure gonna go to Durango while we're there.
Oh, you are?
Yeah. It's I love going down there and just strolling down the whole thing and all that. So while we're there, I may even go take the train ride, but I'm not 100% sure. But if anybody's around Pagosa wants to have a drink, me and Kyle will probably be in Pagosa Brewery at least once or twice while we're there. I think we're staying not too far from there, so yeah, we'll be hitting that up.
All right.
So for all those Colorado listeners, if you're close to Pagosa, holla at your boys.
Oh, man. Well, that's about all the time we have for this episode. For you Elite members, we'll be talking to you later this week. For everybody else, we'll speak to you next Monday. For Pretty Lights, Inner Tradition Books, New Page Books, Anomalous Books, Llewellyn Books, and Ancient American Magazine, I'm Kyle Filson. He's Cam Hale.
Peace, y'all.